as they would sail up the coast, hurricanes and storms would hit them. They would sink not only some of the ships, sometimes entire fleets. These fleets were loaded with gold, silver, emeralds, all kinds of valuable things, and would never be seen again.
Well, everybody hears about the Treasure Coast, the remnants of a single fleet of ships, which was from 1715. There are multiple ships that sank at sea and were never found. And we're on the track of at least one of those shipwrecks now.
Nobody knows what they're building. Nobody knows how unique it truly is because we're in Melbourne, Florida. We're not in Silicon Valley, where the valuation a year ago would have been 100 million.
From the data that we've been collecting, there have been strong implications that there's a lot to find.
I suppose what fascinated me about this is the scattered nature of it. That it was actually a challenge to study this. That when you look at wrecks, so many of them are intact and they're easy to study. Even in the English Channel, you have World War II shipwrecks that are easier to study because they're intact. It really becomes a challenge when you have a wreck site, but it's debris, and you need to study debris, and it's more of a jigsaw puzzle then. And you slowly start to piece together this narrative that helps you really tell what exists here, what is it, and more importantly, what does it mean?
Some 15 years ago, a scatter was found at Melbourne Beach, and there's something called quantitative artifacts, which if you study the artifact, it can lead you to the ship, and something was found called the Monteros plate. It's a large silver plate, and it had a name on Isabel Montero. So if you look back in the archives, the vessel called the Concepcion, which was owned by a gentleman named Monteros, he was transporting that plate and other treasure back to Spain. So that's a diagnostic artifact that says, you know, let me tell you something, there's probably a shipwreck scatter there, which there is, and that could be a missing 1715 vessel, because we had the names of the other vessels, and we could see that, guess what, the Concepcion was on that manifest.
Time to make history.
Let's go.
A little bit of the history, how these events unfolded back in the day. Obviously Columbus discovered a new world, but ultimately they discovered there was gold in that new world. And so within a very short period of time after Columbus, in the early 1500s, the Spanish began to send fleets of ships down to literally pick up this treasure. And first they killed the Incas, the Mayas, and the Aztecs. And then those that they didn't kill, they turned into miners, and they had to mine treasure for them all through South America and even into parts of Mexico.
As you know, 1492, the Columbus era. Then we go to 1510, we go to Pizarro and Cortez and all the explorers. And then we have these people who are searching for gold and silver. They go to Mexico, and they go to South America, Ecuador, and Peru, and they start to mine this silver. One of the great mines was at Potosi, which was a mountain, actual mountain of silver. And they'd mince there. And they minted the coins, and then they had to take the coins back to Spain.
And so these fleets would come down every year and pick up this treasure. And in the very, very early days, they stayed in Santo Domingo. But by the time you got to close to the 1550s, they found a new harbor in Havana, Cuba. And so the ships began to stay there. They would get food, they would repair themselves, and then they'd make the long voyage home back to Seville, Spain. And they discovered the Gulf Stream flowing north up the coast of Florida, and they sailed up that coastline, and then that became their trade routes. And once they had those established trade routes, they stuck to them. because it was primitive at that time in their navigational skills, and a lot of their sailing they would prefer to do by sight of land. And because the Gulf Stream runs 4 to 6 knots most of the time, this was like an elevator ride, at least partly, on the way home. And what would take place is they would go down, they would take these ships made out of wood and iron, and they would load them up heavily with all kinds of product, but they would carry a lot of gold and silver, because that is what financed the Spain. And so as they would sail up the coast, hurricanes and storms would hit them, and we're about to have a hurricane hit us right now. And as these hurricanes would hit, they would sink not only some of the ships, sometimes entire fleets. These fleets were loaded with gold, silver, emeralds, all kinds of valuable things, and they would go down and would never be seen again.
There's something called the Treasure Coast, and people really, they hear it on the news and everything, but the Treasure Coast is really the area between Fort Pierce Inlet and Sebastian Inlet, which is about 35 miles long, which has the remains of the Spanish 1715 plate fleet that was on the way from Havana back to Spain with what's often called a king's ransom of treasure. And of course, we laugh about this. They didn't have the Weather Channel, so they were caught by a hurricane there, the 1715 fleet. Nobody knows exactly how many ships there were, 9, 10, 12. There's various accounts and everything. And they wrecked along that treasure coast. The manifest of these ships, which were anywhere from 80 to 90 feet, 100 feet long, were carrying millions and millions of current dollars, pesos then, in treasure.
Some of the ships ran aground, and these ships were 30, 35 feet across the beam. And if the storm or hurricane pushed them up onto the beach, they might be sitting in 3 feet of water, and you would have a 30, 35 foot beam. You almost had a 3-story building sticking out of the water, and you'd have some survivors. So they were able to salvage those ships that did run aground. And one of our goals are to pursue wrecks that were not salvaged back in the day, that they couldn't find those wrecks. Maybe they're in 60 feet of water, 90 feet of water, 120 feet of water. And at that point in time, the Spanish couldn't find these wrecks. And so for over 300 years, there were all these wrecks that just accumulated.
As far as I know, in my education, there's been nothing else like it ever developed across the world that can read things under the sand as well as differentiate between various types of material. From my perspective, I think this would be an invaluable asset.
There's never been equipment that can see or find gold or silver under the sand until now. And that's going to change the industry sector forever.